Hello and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're going to be talking about custom connectors once again. So basically, I had Willathy reach out to me on PAX Discord server, and he was asking, he was trying to use the directions in the definitive guide to Power Query M, which I wrote the last chapter, which is on custom connectors. I did it for a Discord, a very basic Discord custom connector. He was trying to follow those directions to connect to Monday.com and was having some problems, basically, specifically with the authentication pieces of this. Now, I'm not a huge Discord user, and so sorry, Willathy, that it took me like over a month to see this. But I was able to get him a solution today, and today's the 24th of November, so just over 10 days was able to get him a solution here. So he sent me some code so I could see what he was doing in terms of he was using OAuth authentication. That gave me some more information. I told him I'd sit down with it, really, I'd sit down with it on Monday.com and figure out what I could do. And so I've discovered that, and this we'll go over this because this is a major difference between the Monday.com connector and Discord connector, is that Monday.com does not use OAuth. It actually uses a token key, like a token key, a long string essentially. So we found that out. That kind of led down the path. And anyway, long story short, today, the 24th, I was able to get them. Here's the whole zip file with the MES file and everything else. And originally, I had to have the token sitting in a token file, but then I figured out how to use the current credential. So I'll show how that works. That's a big difference as well. But I'd never used Monday.com before, so I went out and signed up for an account, a free account. Created a custom board. Right, these other things are boards that came with it. I mean, it looks very like Jira and/or Azure DevOps to me. You have boards, you have tasks in the boards, and that sort of thing. So looks pretty interesting. You can do Kanbans and all of that sort of stuff. And actually has some nice features in terms of, like, for example, like I hate this about Azure DevOps, and maybe it's just set up wrong, but like I can't sort by just any column I want to in Azure DevOps. That drives me bananas, I will say. So anyway, the big thing that you really need to do when you're dealing with these APIs, one is you got to read the documentation, right? So you got to find that there's the Monday.com platform API. Here's the page on authentication. And so they have here, here's the API tokens and how to get them. So what you do, so in like Discord is completely different than this. And every one of these APIs is going to be different in terms of how this specifically works and how their API works. It'd be nice if there was a nice standard for all this stuff, but there's not. So you have to go. So the way you get to this is you go to your profile pick, you go to administration, you go to connections, you go to API, and you gen up your token. And here it's all nice, and I like that they have this nice and blurred out. You hit copy, and then what I do is I copy that into a file so I have it saved somewhere. And then the way that the connector will work is the first time you connect to Monday.com, there's no cache credential. It's going to pop up a little window asking for the API key, and you paste that in, right? That's how you're going to use it eventually. And then they have pretty decent API documentation. You got to translate a little bit of this kind of stuff to make it work within Power Query and that. So I'll show you all that as well. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. So like I said, the first thing, so this is pretty similar to the Discord connector as far as the basics of it. But if you notice down here an authentication, so TDG TPQM underscore Monday, right? There's authentication, and it's set to key equal, the key. So because they use a token. So we have to use the key authentication type. Now, the interesting thing, Microsoft's documentation says that when you use key authentication, it passes that key along in the authorization header. Except that it doesn't seem to do that in every request. Maybe it's on the initial authentication request. It passes it along automatically in the authentication header, but it doesn't do that for subsequent requests. You have to add that in yourself. So what you need to do that. So, okay, so once we got the authentication figured out, okay, so now I could actually and connect to it, but now I have to make it actually do something, right? So first thing I went and did was I said, okay, probably need to go get the boards, right? So here's my get boards function. And so this came from, yeah, here we go. So this right here was the query I figured out to get the boards. And I um, cannot stress enough that you really, really, really want to use Postman for this. Okay. This thing, this will actually show you what data you're getting back. Anyway, in Postman, right, I can sit there and there's part of my token, right? I can set my authorization. This is your header and if you read the documentation for Monday.com, they want an authorization. That's what they want the key to be, and then the value, right, in the header. And then they have additional headers, right? So they want to know the API version 2024-7, in this case, content type, application JSON, and then your body, is here's the query, right? So you have query, the colon, and then the query that they're giving you off of the API documentation, right? So if you have API documentation like this, right, you got to change it a little bit so that it works with Postman, right? And with Power BI, to be quite frank. So in Power BI, this query looks more along the lines, or Power Query, this query looks more along. So you have query so in Postman you have query colon, right? But then here you have query equals, and then whatever the query is right there. So that's what that's the post data. So you do an API call, you put your headers. So here's my headers, right? And here you can see the authorization. And what I'm using here is extension current credential key. Okay, so it's extension current credential is the function to get the current credential, and then you're grabbing the key value from that record because it's bringing back a record. And this is all pretty well documented on Microsoft's website. That I just had a little bit of trouble finding it. But so that's how you get the authorization header in there. There's my other headers that I pass along, and then here's my query that I'm going to pass along. And then you do a JSON document, web.content. You call your API URI. Pass in your headers. You pass in your content. And then basically what I did was to get this Power Query code down here, I really just essentially was just bringing back I originally didn't have those last four lines of just above the end. I just did a source equals table.from records API call. And then I brought that in, I published the connector, I brought it into Power BI desktop and I used it. And then I just used the navigation features within Power Query to navigate down to what I wanted. And so that's how I got these four lines right here. So yeah, so that's a pretty easy way to do it. That way you don't have to know all of the M code. You can just have Power Query Editor generate it for you. And it can get a little bit more complicated, right? So here, example is where I'm grabbing the items. So I have to grab the boards, and then I have to grab the items, right, in those boards. So I'm passing in my board ID. Here's a much longer query, right? It's that I'm grabbing, and that's the one that I'm showing here in Postman. Um, so here you can see the data that's coming back, and it's much more complex in terms of its form, right? So there's quite a bit more of it. So essentially, it's the same concept, though, right? Well, if I can do this, get this over here, and it's still grabbing. That's my query string. That's really the only thing that's changed. Post my data, right? And then I use, again, this is Power Query code where I'm navigating down through the data to where I want it. And I didn't blow it out completely because well, you'll see it when I use it. But anyway, so that is that. And then you have to add in your navigation table functions, right? To make it come back as a nice navigation table. This one is most similar to the membership one in the Discord connector, where it's kind of nested, where you have to in that one you had to get your guilds or servers, and then you had your membership tables below that. That's the same concept, right? And you'll see that when we use it, which let's just flip over to it. So this is, I have no idea what I just did. Just trying to zoom in. Yeah. Oh yeah, that is my last thing that I did, and then got rid of that. Well, anyway, I got it to work once. I can get it to work again. It's already compiled and working. All right, so let's flip on over to desktop here. And I'm in Power Query Editor. Right, so Power Query Editor, I've got my meds file all loaded up and all of that. So I go to more. I can type in Monday here. There's my connector. Now I've already authenticated, so it's going to skip past the where it pops up the little give me your token. But yeah, so here's my boards. I can expand my board. So there it is. There's my Power Query connector right there. So I can click on that. And so there's my tasks, right there. I left like the group as a record and the column values as a list. So I click OK. Right. So now if I want to get all the columns, right, I can extract that to new rows or extract the values or do whatever I want, right? And then that has a title, and I can do stuff like I don't know what extract the values. Oh yeah, I can do like comma separated list or something like that. That's right. Oh, that didn't work. It's not my fault. Check new rows then. Oh, there we go. Records. Oh, there's all the different with more. Well, there's my different columns. So I have a column that has an ID, a type, and a value, basically. So anyway, I'm sure, so Willithy, took me a little bit to get there, but hopefully this works for you. If not, you've got all the code to go in and modify it to however you see fit. But yeah, so there's a Monday.com. Now I also had somebody connect with me on LinkedIn about Qualtrics. And Qualtrics API, when I went to the authentication section, it wants to come up. Well, long story short, there we go. And they've got decent documentation as well, but they also basically use a token, right? So they're also going to be, and I can't code this one because Qualtrics doesn't seem to have a free, like sign up for a free trial account. So it's going to be really hard to code the a connector for Qualtrics without being able to test the thing. But it's also using a key account. And it is, in this case, though, it is using the header XAPI token. Instead of authentication, it's going to use this token instead that you're going to have to pass along with every request. And you'll probably, so anyway, so, it's unfortunate when people reach out to me and I can't really help them, but there's nothing much I can do with Qualtrics because they're like, it's one of those places where they don't give you the pricing. They like, request a demo and there's no free trial. So there's not much I can do about that one, but it's going to be very similar, more similar to the Monday.com connector. So I sent them the Monday.com, zip file, and I can make it available on the GitHub, my GitHub for Microsoft Hates Greg as well. I'll throw it out there so that everybody can have it. But it's a good example of where you're using key authentication versus using OAuth. I used OAuth in the book because it's far more complicated. It was the most complicated one, in my opinion. And it's, that to me is more of a standard out there for APIs. But as I've come to find out, there's quite a few APIs out there that are just using a standard key/token to authenticate to them. So this will be a good example if you have an API that does that. All right. Well, that's all I had for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.